Hello and welcome back to another episode of Kherson Weekly. This is the third installment of my companion YouTube series, paired with my articles that I release on Substack on Kherson Weekly at brendankelly.substack.com. I have a new article. Excuse me, it's quite late at the time of recording. A new article that I published yesterday that we'll be going over today, and then I want to talk about some other stuff as well. So, let's get into this week's article. So, Kherson Weekly, 3rd November, 9th November 2025. Introducing the Sky Devils, Recon Corps, revisiting the Hateful Eight, and civilian casualty updates. Given that it is Veterans Day in the United States and Armistice Day in Europe, and the Liberation Day of Kherson, one of my Ukrainian sources on the ground gave me permission to use this photograph that they took of poppies in southern Kherson Oblast. Red poppy flowers blanket a field seeming stretching to the horizon in southern Kherson Oblast. The flower is deeply symbolic. Excuse me. The flower is deeply symbolic in Ukrainian traditional culture, with folklore and legends stating poppies grow where the blood has spilled of true Cossack warriors. Okay. Really important thing before we get going. Kherson Help really needs our help with their anti-human safari campaign. They're just about 900 euros away from their goal. They want to complete it by Christmas. We only have a few weeks until that time. We need to get that done. If anyone can donate, please do. Even just a little bit helps get us closer and closer to that finish line so that we can get more drone detectors to people on the ground. Okay. Video of the week. This week, Berislav Rayon Administration Head Volodymyr Litvinov shared video of heroic evacuation operations conducted by Boxer and soldiers of from the 153rd Separate Mechanized Brigade in Berislav City. In a truly remarkable feat given the ferocity of Russian drone attacks in Berislav this week, 30 civilians and 2 dogs were successfully evacuated from the city. Berislav has endured 2 going on 3 years of human safari-style attacks from Russian drones. Litvinov described the operations on Telegram. Berislav lives under enemy fire every day. Every day here is a trial. The lives of residents are constantly under threat, and an evacuation attempt turns into a risky operation for both those being rescued and for those who take responsibility for the safety of others. Despite the deadly danger, volunteer Andriy Petukhov, callsign Boxer, together with servicemen of the 153rd Separate Mechanized Brigade, showed incredible courage and humanity. Thanks to their coordinated and brave actions, it was possible to evacuate 30 people and 2 dogs, giving them a chance for safety, peace, and a new life. The successful evacuation was made possible thanks to the coordination and support of the Berislav City Military Administration. I sincerely thank Andriy Petukhov and the soldiers of the 153rd Brigade for their courage, dedication, and kindness. Their act is a vivid example of true heroism, humanity, and love for the people. It is precisely thanks to such people that even where it seems there is no hope, it appears again. Let's watch this video. It's a really quick one. Let me put myself on mute. Nice dog at the end there. Okay. Again, Boxer keeps going into situations with conditions that are indescribable, inexplicable to the average person. All right, bringing back a segment that I have done on Kherson Weekly on Substack quite often in the past, but I haven't done here in some time, and I've never done on YouTube ever. So, after diving back into Russian units releasing footage this week, 2 recent releases from the Russian Hateful Eight drone group showcase significant developments from Russian forces in their continuation of the war crimes of the human safari. Russian forces responsible for striking Western Kherson, where the Delta Group used to operate, have been unveiled this week as a group called the Recon Corps, Dnieper. Additionally, Russian VDV forces continue their attacks in southern Mykolaiv Oblast, targeting coastal defenses and Pervomaisky Island. So, revisiting the Hateful Eight, 27th October 2025. So, this is a bit of archival footage that I thought was important enough that we need to bring it back up. For the first time, Russian Baba Yaga drones may be active in Kherson. Footage from the Hateful Eight showed a Mavic reconnaissance drone capturing skid drop bombing conducted by what they claim was a Ukrainian vampire drone, which had been shot down, recovered, reverse engineered, and then employed against Ukrainians by Russian forces themselves. In the footage, 2 people in the riverside village of Tyakhinka were targeted by the Russian Baba Yaga drone. So let's take a look at this footage here. I do need to make sure that we cut the audio ASAP, because this is gonna be copyrighted. Okay, so we can see here, I geolocated this footage myself. You can see this is the footage from the Mavic, but the Baba Yaga drone is somewhere off screen above, dropping munitions down above. I mean, it could be a Mavic that's dropping the munitions. That's why I say claim, but we'll see in a second some evidence that it may not be just a Mavic. So here we get some thermal. Series of strikes with skid drops. Now here's our clue. Now this is a UI that we see with another Russian drone that's a hexacopter, a heavy bomber, called the Cuckoo. Now, we do know that Hateful Eight are connected to Soulless Aviation and Moses. They were both subordinate to 8th Guard's separate artillery regiment, who were stationed in Kherson up until the invasion of Kursk Oblast, and then after about like the 3rd week of the Kursk operation, these guys got transferred there and stayed in Kursk and Sumy for about a year before returning in August of this year. In that time, they've shot down a lot of vampire drones and worked on reverse engineering them. We do know that Moses has been successfully reverse engineering Ukrainian vampire drones, although I don't think they have the same capabilities. In payload, similar, but in terms of, targeting and UI interface and stuff like that, connectivity, resistance to jamming, I don't know if we're dealing with the same monster here. This is pretty much an exact copy of the Cuckoo UI, but it's claimed being installed into a Ukrainian vampire that's been captured. So Russia may be able to capture the vampire drones, but they haven't necessarily been able to use vampires like technology as of yet, from my understanding. So what we're seeing here is some like very typical sort of like primitive, I guess, night bombing operations going on in Beryaslav Rayon from the Hateful Eight. Okay, on the 4th of November this week, the group released more footage of their operations off the coast of Crimea, while also revealing their continued cooperation with the infamous Rubicon Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies. The units cooperated in detection and interdiction of Ukrainian USVs attempting to strike naval assets and infrastructure around Crimea or closer to Russia on the night of 1st to 2nd November. The operations depicted required a Russian Inhodets fixed-wing reconnaissance UAV directing strikes by several Lancet loitering munitions to destroy 4 Ukrainian USVs, as they claim. So let's take a look here at Rubicon and the Russian MOD. They use
Передаємо ось цю чудову магору весті. Черговий етап нашого великого збору, до якого долучається дуже багато наших друзів, артистів, інфлюенсерів та лідерів думок. І згодом він буде переданий для подальшої роботи бійцям груп 13.
Yeah, I have a feeling that that's going to be something that's copyrighted, so we're going to leave the music out. So here we can see they were claiming that these are Maguras. That was a Ukrainian clip that they had taken, and now they're claiming to destroy these. You can actually see the AI locking on the target when it reaches its terminal approach. So again, these are Lancet loitering munitions that are claimed to be used to intercept. So no longer are Russian forces using like helicopters, right? Because we saw helicopters sending jets out to go interdict these things. Might not be the best case or the best counter to these drones, especially if they can carry an R-73 on them. You do not want to be flying around. Well, these have R-73s on them. That's a bad time for a helicopter or a fighter jet. So, loitering munitions seem to be a relatively logical intercept capability to destroy these. Much in the same way that Ukrainians use interceptor drones to destroy Shaheeds. Although, Lancets aren't exactly cheap. So, this is coming at a cost. Not that the USVs cost less than a Lancet, but the cost trade-off between a Shahed and an interceptor drone is not the same as what you're seeing here. Okay, so that is Hateful 8. So, one thing I want to say about this. Continued harassment of Russian naval forces and marine infrastructure by Ukrainian USVs is continuing to draw Russian unmanned systems units away from the front line and toward the peripheries of occupied territories. I believe that these continued Black Sea operations by the Ukrainian Navy are an excellent strategy to threaten Russian logistics, while also drawing some of Russia's most effective and most brutal drone units away from participating in the human safari. I truly believe that. If these guys were not intercepting USVs in the Black Sea and trying to prevent Russia's Navy from sinking to the bottom of the ocean, these guys would be absolutely massacring people in Kherson, because that's what these guys did best. These were some of the first to engage in the human safari when it was worse in fall of 2024, late summer and fall of 2024. These guys, 8th Guards Artillery Regiment, they were some of the worst, and units associated with them continue to be some of the worst. So, it's a good trade-off, in a way, that we're able to draw these guys to Kursk, we're able to draw these guys to Crimea, and keep them off of Kherson. Because you do not want Hateful 8 running the logistics campaign of, say, like Phobos Group or the Delta team. You don't want that. Is good, well, good is not the right term, as effective as Delta Group, Phobos, and maybe like the Roy team, the Roy Group, as effective as they have been in their employment of siege tactics with small unmanned systems, these guys are better. And the fact that they're not actually being engaged like that is indicative of the effectiveness of Ukrainian operations in Kherson, Crimea, to some extent. Okay. Recon Corps Dnepr, these guys are relatively new. They just emerged this past week. Emerging on Telegram on 31st October, another human safari drone group began sharing footage of Russian drone siege operations in Kherson. The new channel goes by Recon Corps and shares footage mostly geolocated to the western edge of Kherson City, where the now defunct and formerly infamous Delta Group used to operate. And they posted, "Greetings to everyone. We were brought to you by an increased sense of justice and desire to show you who we are." So, justice, right? These guys want to show off their war crimes and all for a sense of justice because they feel like they've been wrongly accused. So now they're going to openly share footage. Fair enough. Let's have a look. So, on the same day of the channel's creation, it shared footage of a strike on a store in Karabel Island, which Russian mill blogger Osvidomitel Alex claimed to have already captured some weeks ago. So, this is our first look here of pilot Radan flying a VT-40 FPV drone. Here we say it's a Starlink, and it says retranslator, so like a retransmitter of some kind. And this is in Karabelny. This is on the island that the Russians claim to have captured. And they claim to destroy that with that FPV. Maybe they did. I mean, it's conceivable that they did. But that's the claim. We also have that geolocated on Ukraine Daily Update map if you want to take a look. Then later on the 3rd, the group struck a vehicle in Shumensky Rayon, complete with a threat of murder to any civilians perceived as being merely proximal to Ukrainian forces. So let's take a look here. Again, probably copyrighted music that they're stealing, so we're not going to watch that. Okay. There's your drone strike. It's footage from the ground combined with their footage. Okay. And it says, "City of Kherson, this is our land, and we decide who, how, and when we can drive here." Or when can drive here. We ask the peaceful population to stay away from the Ukro-Nazis. Otherwise, there will be a fucking end. Very normal, very... How did they say it? Justice. A sense of justice. That's totally what I get out of this. Threatening to kill civilians if they're near the Ukro-Nazis. So just. Okay. On the 4th of November, we also saw the group twice struck a building claimed to be captured by Russian mill blogger Osvidomitel Alex's ongoing propaganda campaign. In reality, the island is held by Ukrainian forces, as demonstrated by continued Russian FPV and artillery strikes across the island on areas that they specifically claim to have captured. excuse me, they claim to have captured this building 2 weeks ago. Not true. Let's take a look. I geolocated it. I'll show you where it is. Okay, so they're going to launch 2 FPV drone attacks against this communications array. And that same communications array is going to get hit again by the second attack. Yep. And then on the other side of the island, this is heading in towards the city. This cell phone tower here is going to get hit by an FPV. Okay, so let's take a look at where that was. We can use this link here, and that'll get us there. So if we want to take a look at where those events were, let's go to the next day. Actually, here, I can show you. 31st. Here's our store that got hit. Now, if we're talking about the events that we just saw on the 4th, so they absolutely covered this with MLRS fire. All areas that they claim to have captured. That was geolocated by Andrew. But this is our building right here. This is our building right here that got hit. They claim to have already captured that. Not true at all, right? Some amphibious landing that they claim, and they claim that they were clearing out this part of the island last week. It's not true. It's insanity. Okay. Okay, his caption. In honor of the holiday, Day of National Unity, we congratulate our brotherly people. They had crossed it out. They struck through it as well on Telegram. But we will give you your free time since we have cut off your communication, and there is more to come. Gas stations, critical infrastructure, gas. We will get to everything. We will return you to the Stone Age. Again, sounds like justice. Sounds like justice. Maybe. Stone Age, murder, justice. On 8th of November in Bilizerka, Russian forces hit a van leaving town via the westward exit along the Slavyanska highway. Recon Corps also claimed that this vehicle belonged to the Ukrainian military and that all of the, quote, scoundrels followed after, despite no evidence to prove either claim, meaning that they killed anybody who was in the vehicle, presumably. Although reports don't necessarily track with that. I don't have a whole bunch of dead people in Bilizerka on the 8th of November. Wounded, maybe. Dead? Certainly not. Let's take a look. Again, they like to steal music. So this is heading out towards Mykolaiv, towards Stanislav, towards Mykolaiv. I'll show you guys where it is in a second. And this is not a military vehicle. Okay. So, if we want to take a look at where this happened, Bilizerka is over here. You can see our little crook in the road. This happened like right about here is where the car got hit. It was leaving town along the Stanislavska highway, right, heading either towards Stanislav itself and then towards Mykolaiv, or trying to get up and over the Russian drones, because, right, like the Russian drones can interdict the highway. They try and hit this highway right here, between Chernobyevka and like the checkpoints at Klapaya. So if you can get up and over and heading towards like Posad Pokrovsk or get on the main highway, which is protected now, like this whole highway is protected by drone netting. This highway is not protected by drone netting, as you can see. As you can see. Okay, so that is our look at Nepracor. They've just released only a few videos. Those are their very first videos, and some of which my colleagues have geolocated, some of which I geolocated myself this week, just because like I think less than 100 people even know about the account, but now more people will. But that's kind of what we do here is we find these really small drone pilot drone unit accounts, and we try and keep up with all the different um, sort of splintering accounts that come off of some accounts that get deleted and stuff like that over time, or the operator of the account gets killed and someone forgets to log in and keep it alive, and so then they start a new one. So it's important that we keep on top of this stuff. So more updates to follow. We'll see if the Recon Corps continue to be sort of like Delta Team 2.0, or I can't really tell if they're better than Delta Team. Based on what I've seen, they're not. Delta Group, excuse me, seems better. Delta Group seems better. So I really am doubtful about that. All right, VDV strikes in Mykolaiv, a relatively new account, another one, seemingly linked to Russian VDV unit, has been posting footage geolocated to southern Mykolaiv Oblast. In the footage released, we see the unit striking positions of the woods in Kutsurubska Hromada and positions on Pervomaisky Island, a man-made island in the Dnipro estuary. On 26th of October 2025, a Russian Vandal drone strikes Ukrainian fortifications in woods south of Solanchake in Mykolaiv Oblast. So let's take a look here. This is the Sky Devils. These guys have a little VDV thing that you'll see in all of their posts, and that's how we were able to make this. So I'll, again, cut the audio in case of our copyright strike. But you can see drone tunnels basically guard all of these positions. We'll take a look at where this occurred in just a second. And you can see they're kind of, these trenches are dug in amongst the woods along the coast. You can see these are the cliffs of like the southern Dnieper estuary. You can kind of see like the same kind of geological features near Stanislav. But if we go to our map, let's go to Solanchaki. So here's Solanchaki, and here are our little set of cliffs. And we have our rows and rows and rows of trees. Our positions are somewhere in here, as far as I was able to tell. They got hit at the end there. You can see more positions have actually appeared. You can see where the trenches are all throughout here. They're actually on the map, which is interesting to see. And there's coastal fortifications as well. They aren't super visible on the map, but they do exist. I think they're better on Maxar, but I can't show you Maxar. Okay. And again, on 31st of October, they launched Vandal drones against Pervomaisky Island. I'll show you guys that in a second. Yeah, we need to turn that off. The Bashkir language EDM. Nobody wants to hear that. You can see people, personnel, most likely military personnel if it's on this island, being spotted and then targeted by the drone strike. And you can see here the outer island, or not the outer island, but the island from the outside. It is a man-made island. Let's go to the Ochakiv area here. This is the island that we're talking about, Pervomaisky Island. So we had our drone strike occurring here. As far as we know, there is a sort of a back and forth. Well, I mean, it's controlled by Ukrainian special forces, naval forces, but Russians on the Kinburn Spit often attack that island or Ochakiv or Kutsurubska Armada in much, in a very similar manner as to how they attack all of the riverside communities. So I think it's important that we don't leave Mykolaiv Oblast out of our analysis of the human safari, as a lot of the units that participate in the human safari here often do rotate down to the Kinburn Spit to carry out attacks in Mykolaiv Oblast. So let's move on to our situation report. So first of all, details of 2nd November need to be corrected and clarified. The 82-year-old woman reported as being killed by shelling last week was actually killed by a Russian drone attack, according to Kherson police. 7 more civilians were also wounded on 2nd November, who then sought medical care throughout this week. 2 women, ages 72 and 69, were wounded via Russian drone attacks in Bilizerka, while a 65-year-old man and a 60-year-old woman were injured via Russian shelling in the same village. Russian shelling also injured a doctor from Kherson, a 56-year-old man in Centralny Raion, and a 50-year-old woman in Komishany. Russian shelling wounded 5 civilians on November 3rd. 2 fishermen, ages 37 and 75 in Karabalny Raion, a 65-year-old woman in Dniprovsky Raion, and a 59-year-old man and 56-year-old woman in Bilizerka. Only 1 civilian was wounded on 4th November. A 49-year-old woman was injured by Russian shelling in Bilizerka. Likewise, on the 5th of November, only 1 person, a 53-year-old woman, was injured via a Russian drone attack in Kherson. However, on the 6th of November, Russian drone attacks in Dniprovsky Raion were exclusively responsible for 8 civilian casualties. Russian forces once again struck a public bus in order to create a mass casualty event. 4 civilians were injured on the bus, a 14-year-old girl, a 43-year-old man, and 2 elderly women, ages 74 and 87. More drone attacks on civilian vehicles injured a 28-year-old woman and a 54-year-old man. Further strikes on civilians on the streets wounded 2 men, ages 35 and 49. And here we have a video from the next day of a rescue of a 50-year-old woman, because the next day, Russian shelling in Kherson killed a 52-year-old man, wounded 2 women, ages 50 and 61, and a 58-year-old man. The rescue of the 50-year-old woman, should not say women, should say woman, I will correct that after, was captured on Kherson Patrol Police body cam footage seen above. Drone attacks wounded 2 men, 68 and 85, and a 58-year-old woman in the Dniprovsky Raion, while another 75-year-old man was wounded in Kherson proper. Let's take a look at the video.
Ви чуєте мене, так? Тихо, 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 тихо. Можете чуть-чуть передвинутися? Вас зажало? Єсть. Давай. Тихо. Тихо, 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 тихо. Держіться. Держіться за мене. Головне, держіться.
Чекай, відійди. Відійди, я послухаю. Все. Виход.
Щас. Держіться за мене. Ложи, сажуся. Держіться за мене. Держіться. Ложу.
So, we can see she suffered a pretty extreme injury to one of her shins. I think she had an open fracture on her left leg. She was trapped under the rubble. One of her neighbors called the cops and actually got them to pull her out. So, she did survive. And we can see some of the damage here from that apartment. I think this is actually the same apartment, perhaps. Yeah, this was from the night of the 7th to the 8th, so it could be the same. Okay, on 8th November, Russian shelling continued to devastate Belozerka and Kherson. 2 men, ages 59 and 91, were wounded in Dniprovsky Rayon, while 2 men, ages 30 and 37, were wounded in Belozerka, and a 17-year-old girl was wounded in Kherson proper due to Russian shelling alone. 2 vehicles were also damaged after a series of Russian drone attacks on vehicles outside a medical facility in Kherson. One of the vehicles destroyed here being an ambulance for medical evacuations. A Shahed drone strike hit the village of Rozliv, wounding a 38-year-old woman. A skid drop from a Russian drone wounded a 46-year-old municipal worker. A 12-year-old boy was also wounded from handling an unexploded munition in Stanislav. The next day in Stanislav, a 26-year-old man was killed and a 35-year-old female medic, was wounded due to a Russian drone attack. Drone attacks wounded 3 more civilians across Kherson. An 87-year-old woman and a 64-year-old man were wounded in Dniprovsky Rayon, and a 59-year-old man was wounded in Shumensky Rayon. Shelling targeted Belozerka and Kherson yet again, wounding a 58-year-old couple in Belozerka and a 54-year-old man and a 75-year-old woman in Karabalny Rayon. You can see some of the aftermath of the shelling of Beryaslav Rayon on 3rd November here. Because in Beryaslav Rayon this week, 2 elderly civilians were wounded by Russian shelling on 6th November. A 76-year-old woman and a 73-year-old man were both wounded in the city. Russian drone attacks killed 4 and wounded 5 more civilians. A 33-year-old man was killed on 5th November, and a 52-year-old man was killed on 8th of November. A Russian drone attack on a bus stop in Novovorontssovka on 7th November killed a 50-year-old man, wounded a 19-year-old girl, a 33-year-old man, and a 44-year-old man, and a 62-year-old man was killed by a drone in or near the exit of Lvove some weeks ago, and his body was finally recovered on the 9th of November. So here we can take a look at our civilian casualties. Again, mostly focusing on Dniprovsky Rayon this week, with actually quite a large focus again on Belozerka. That was one pattern I noticed when I was doing the data for this week, is it was sort of Dniprovsky Rayon and Belozerka, with actually kind of an uptick for Stanislav. It's kind of rare that Stanislav gets this much activity, but it did. Karabalny Rayon was a little bit quiet for the amount of focus that they've been putting into it recently, I thought. But by and large, Beryaslav Rayon was where it was most active, in terms of like a stark difference from last week to this week. There's the biggest change there, in my opinion. So overall, miscellaneous shelling and bombing killed 1 person and wounded 25, including a doctor. Drones, being FPV drones, Mavic drones, and Molnia drones, killed 1 person, wounded 20 more. Among them, 1 municipal worker and another medic. Garan and Shahed type drones wounded 1 civilian, that 1 woman in Roslev. Kind of an odd place for a drone to hit. Makes me think it was actually shot down. Although Roslev is actually pretty close to the Kherson defensive line, so the defensive fortifications, we do know, have been coming under attack from Russian Shahed and Garan style drones recently. So that could be a factor. They could have been targeting defensive fortifications but hit the village instead. Or it could have been shot down. Or they could have just been using it to target civilians. There's multiple. But again, nonetheless, really rare that we see that. Still an interesting data point this week. And then we saw the 12-year-old child who picked up a unexploded piece of ordnance and was therefore wounded in Stanislav. That is our singular UXO casualty this week. So for Kherson Rayon, this gives us a total of 49 civilian casualties, 2 killed and 47 wounded. You can click the link there to my spreadsheet to look at my data if you so choose. In Beryaslav Rayon, we saw 11 total casualties. Excuse me. But much higher death rate, right? That's the theme with Beryaslav. It's much deadlier there than it is reported in Kherson Rayon, even though the volume of overall attacks is less. And even though the population density is actually a lot less in Beryaslav Rayon as well, it is still deadlier. So only 2 people were wounded by shelling. That's our elderly couple, 76 and 73. And then 4 people were killed by drones, 5 wounded, and no casualties in Beryaslav from Garan Shahed or UXO. So for the entire oblast, that brings us to around 60 casualties this week. Less than last week. 6 killed, 54 wounded. It's a relatively high number of killed in comparison to wounded, driven mostly by what we saw occurring in Beryaslav Rayon. Compared to a typical week in Kherson Rayon, that is, it was relatively not as deadly as usual. I'll put it like that. And then if we want to take a look at our infrastructure report, it's about on par with what we had last week, if not maybe a little bit less. Excuse me. I think this is a case of, so the Russians have said that they want to dismantle the city brick by brick. I believe that they want to do that. Do I believe that they can do that? Their goal is to do so by March. I don't think so. I don't think they can do that. It would require much more participation by the Russian VKS. And very recently, basically since September, the Russian Air Force has been very quiet in Kherson Oblast. Very few airstrikes on the city itself, whereas over the summer and early fall, we were getting lots of paired artillery, aerial bombing, and FPV drone strikes. So you get this like three punch kind of combo going on here. This 3-component combo. That's not happening, in part because the units that do that are no longer there, but also in part because the VKS's own activity has been a lot less, and now we're also getting this like Shahed component thrown in. So it's like, what are they? Excuse me. What are they trying to do? What's the angle here? Because if you were trying to dismantle the city, I would assume that you would really try and maximize the number of aerial bombs that you were dropping per day. You wouldn't be rotating your drone groups out, because really, like, these numbers are very similar to the numbers of last week, which suggests to me, like, when you're getting these consistent numbers week after week, despite you saying that you're ramping things up, it suggests to me either that you're lying that you're ramping things up, or that you've hit critical mass, right? Like, this is all that you're capable of in terms of fire missions in a given period of time. Um, you're not going to be able to accelerate within a shorter window. As it is, this isn't enough volume of fire to dismantle the city. Is it enough to further depopulate people and demoralize people? Absolutely. Um, but this is not enough to do what they say they want to do. If you're only hitting 30 apartment buildings and 66 private homes a week, you're not going to do that. It's a city of what used to be 300,000 people. It's going to require a lot more than that. Because this shelling isn't necessarily demolishing these buildings either. Like, you've seen the damage here, right? It's significant damage, but we're not talking about entire apartment buildings collapsing. We are seeing private homes completely demolished in some cases with artillery shelling or, excuse me, with grad rocket fire. But again, this isn't going to get the sort of bulldozed result that the Russians are looking for, or claim they're looking for. It suggests to me that they can't put out fires more than they actually are. We already know at this moment, right? Like, their self-propelled artillery batteries are using towed guns, which suggests that they're not in a position to be they're not in the most effective fighting position. They're in a weakened fighting position. Many of the units on this front are not well equipped. They are not fully manned. And in many cases, some of them have been beaten up on other fronts and then transferred here. So I am skeptical of this idea that they will complete this goal of demolishing the city by March. We'll see. It's going to require a lot more air power. There's still a long time between now and March. Let's be realistic about that as well. But it is going to require significantly more aerial bombing, which I don't see Russia doing right now. Okay. So 30 apartment buildings, 66 private homes, an administrative building, a municipal facility, 2 medical facilities, an office building, a gymnasium, 3 garages, a warehouse, 2 outbuildings, a cell tower, 4 critical infrastructure facilities, one of which was a factory, and 2 natural gas pipelines were damaged. And as well, we saw a police car and 23 civilian automobiles, 2 buses, and 2 excavators destroyed this week. Just remember, Kherson will never be a Russian city. Share, subscribe, comment, and share the publication. All of my sources are available in a bibliography style. I split them up into languages and put them in alphabetical order. So you have like a Ukrainian bibliography, a Russian bibliography, and an English language bibliography. Everything in your MLA format and alphabetical order. So, what else I wanted to talk about post article? On my Substack, I also have started this series called Red Zone Ukraine. Red Zone Ukraine is actually taking what I do with Kherson and kind of expanding it to the rest of the front line. So we know about Russian drone attacks throughout um, Donetsk Oblast, Sumy, Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, um, sometimes Chernihiv, although recently not so much. A couple weeks ago, definitely a lot of attacks in Chernihiv, um, and Mykolaiv Oblast. So we want to make sure Kharkiv as well. We want to make sure that we get all of these drone attacks recorded, so all civilian casualties from Russian Class 1 and Class 2 drones are going to be collected in a weekly dispatch that I'll publish here. I won't do a companion video with it. I might talk about some things that go on here. There's obviously going to be a little bit of overlap between Kherson Weekly and what goes on here just because of the number of casualties that happen in Kherson due to drones. But yeah, let's take a quick gander at some stuff that I think is actually important for us. So, yeah, some bus attacks there, attacks on some other cars, police, buses. There were some attacks on journalists. I don't know if you guys saw the attack on the Austrian and Spanish journalist that happened near Konstantinivka this week. But I wanted to show you guys the totals here for the different oblasts and then some of the graphics that I have. So Sumy Oblast, we saw 2 people were killed, 13 were wounded for a total of 15, right? Look at where this is occurring. It's occurring in really only a couple spots in Sumy, mostly around Seredna Buda, which is very interesting because if you know where Seredna Buda is, it's not an area that you would typically associate with an active front because it hasn't been yet. But as we've seen activity sort of escalating along the Bryansk Chernihiv Sumy border over the last year or so, it's really been sort of almost like I don't know, like 8 months or something like that of escalation. Um, this is something becoming a lot more common within the last month, specifically this focus on Seredin and Buda. So we may be seeing Russia trying to use drones to depopulate this city. And it, honestly, like, okay, so if you take the logic of Kherson or the logic of Kupiansk or any of the other cities that are trying to use the drone safari to siege down, this makes perfect sense as a place to employ these tactics because the border is right on the city's outer limits. So Russian forces can sit back in sovereign Russian territory. They can hang out in these woods up here and send drones southward to cut off the logistics route. So like you could cut off this northern logistics route really easily. You could cut off this westward logistics route and the one south of it fairly easily too. And then depending on where you have other forces, you could even cut it off coming from the south to the north. So because Seredna Buda is kind of like out on the salient here, just a little bit. It's not like that much of a salient, but it's kind of a salient. Not necessarily a great position to be in, and we're seeing that's already having effects. So that's something to pay attention to. Novhorodsk is also in that same area. They attacked a farmer, 26-year-old farmer, attacked him in his tractor. In Kharkiv Oblast, we saw 10 people wounded, 3 killed, 7 wounded. Most of these being near Kupiansk, Shevchenko Persha being the exception. That's much closer to Vovchansk. So those are kind of your hot spots there. Like if you think of like Kharkiv Oblast, your human safari hotspots are going to be like Kozacha-Lopan, Vovchansk, and Kupyansk. So Krylyakivka, Yasinovate, Kalinova, Putnikova, Pidliman. These are all like sort of in the Kupyansk to Barova area is kind of like what I think of it. It's all of your Oskil River towns or towns close to them. Villages really is what they are. Donetsk Oblast. We saw 16 casualties, 3 killed, including 1 policeman, and 13 wounded. We saw a major from the Kramatorsk Police Department killed this week. And as you can see, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka tend to be the focuses. You do have some like Rai, Alexandrivka, and Liman in there, and Yarova as being sort of like the more northernmost instances, just north of Sloviansk, and then kind of in between Kramatorsk and Konstantinivka, you have Malotaranivka and Kindrativka. So those were where we saw some bus attacks. Causing some civilian casualties. Okay. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, we saw 12 casualties, 1 killed, 11 wounded, focusing pretty much all along the Dnipro River, right? Majority occurring within Nikopol, but north of Nikopol, we also saw a casualty in Tomakivska Hromada, and then west of Nikopol, we saw Pokrovska rural Hromada, and even further west of that, we saw a civilian killed in a driver killed in Hrushkivka or Hrushivska Hromada. Okay, Zaporizhia Oblast, we saw 11 casualties, 2 killed, 9 wounded, including 4 DSNS personnel. So a van full of rescuers was hit this week in between the towns of Primorska and Ryhorivka. Additionally, 2 more casualties. We weren't sure where they were from. Were there. We also saw Hulyaipola is another area of focus, and another person was also killed near Primorska. I'm assuming either the 28-year-old or the 46-year-old were also in Primorska, because we did know that another person was wounded with the 46-year-old man in Primorska, but we weren't sure who. Was not reported who was with them. So it's either the 28 or the 46-year-old. That said, right, 2 hotspots emerge. The Primorska area just south of Zaporizhia is a pretty important hotspot, and then obviously Hulyaipola is also really important, because Svitkova is really not very far from Hulyaipola as well. Okay, and Kherson obviously being the largest focus. We've talked at length about what happened here, but 4 killed, 24 wounded, 28 total. The numbers are going to be different than Kherson Weekly because the dates are slightly staggered by a day, so don't get thrown off by the statistics being different. But let's take a look. Total non-combatant civilian drone casualties. So you can see kind of a timeline of the week here, with the 6th being by far and away the worst, but casualties remaining relatively low early in the week and finishing relatively low at the end of the week. In terms of class 2 and class 1 and class 2 UAVs by oblast over the course of the week, we could see, right, like Kharkiv being towards the bottom, Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, although being relatively active for their areas this week, in comparison, Donetsk and Sumy were much more active. Dnipropetrovsk, highly active by its standard. Typically, I expect Dnipropetrovsk to be the least active, with Zaporizhia and Kharkiv following it. but Sumy and Donetsk being about half of what happens in Kherson, that tracks. That tracks. I suspect things in Donetsk are much worse. We just don't have the reporting to back it up. But as we can see, right, 15 killed, 77 wounded for 92 total casualties. Again, you can find all my sources if you want. So that's the other thing I wanted to show you guys this week on my Substack. Beyond that, today was Kherson Liberation Day, which is a extremely important day for Kherson Weekly and an extremely important day at this point in Ukrainian history and for Ukrainian culture as well. I wanted to show a couple videos. In particular, had some on my Instagram that I wanted to share with y'all. Okay, so you guys can follow me on Instagram if you so choose. And I want to go to my stories here. Okay, so I want to take a look here at this post from Vhoru, which is a local news media organization in Kherson. Okay, so you could see in this footage, that's Robert Brovdi, right? That's Magyar. He was part of the liberating forces that came through as Russian forces retreated across the Dnieper River, risked being encircled within the city and completely cut off, but because of a deal of sorts, they were able to liberate the city, and the Russians were able to retreat, leaving in their trail a absolute devastation. I tried to actually go back through the casualties from Liberation Day onward towards 2023. It is a statistician's, data entrist's nightmare. The reports are unclear. Numbers, who died, when, where, how. No one knows. No one knows. It's just bodies. It's just bodies. Lots of stories of abductions. The reports are full of torture. Really hard to come up with a way to put that all into data that anybody can understand in any kind of meaningful way. So I actually stopped taking the data because it just felt like I wouldn't be able to present it in any kind of meaningful way. Maybe I'll be able to find a way in the future, but it seemed almost impossible just because of the horrifically chaotic nature of it all. So let's go back. I want to show some more. Today, Zelensky actually visited the city, and we also saw earlier this week Zelensky announced that he was putting forth sort of a defensive initiative for Kherson to protect it from drones. In November 2022, Our blue and yellow flags, which people had hidden for months, once again flew over the streets of Kherson. We remember that joy, those tears, those hugs, the gratitude you feel when you see your people returning. The occupiers fled Kherson thanks to the strength of our people, and it is that same strength of our people that allows us to protect lives and to rebuild after the strikes, which are practically a daily occurrence. Russia terrorizes Kherson every day. Ordinary people, ordinary life, and that is precisely why Russia has no place here. Kherson is Ukraine. These are people who value life and truly rejoice when those who defend life achieve results. We are grateful to our warriors who defended and liberated Kherson. We remember all who gave their lives for freedom of the city. This is forever. And just as we have not forgotten Kherson, we will remember all our cities and villages occupied by the enemy. We will do everything to bring them home. Glory to our defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Okay. Not Kyiv independent. Okay, I want to take a look here from Special Operations Forces of Ukraine.
Прилітає з Херсона!
Мы терпели, мы ждали, мы ждем только вас.
За наше майбутнє!
6 років, малятку!
За наше майбутнє!
Контролируй, чердаки.
А ну дай хоть помолчи.
Мина! Мина!
Okay, so that was the perspective of Special Operations Forces once they had come into the city. You can really see how much it meant to the people, and how much this day still will mean to people going forward. Okay, and then another message from Zelensky from today, and he's going to talk a little bit about Kherson. Let's go to his post.
Сьогодні в Херсоні вже третя річниця звільнення міста від росіян. Окупанти втекли звідси. Ми пам'ятаємо, як сміливість наших людей зробила це, як українські прапори повернулись у місто Херсон. Я дякую кожному нашому воїну, хто бився заради Херсону, кожному, хто захищає це прекрасне місто зараз, життя наших людей. Провів сьогодні тут нараду з усіма, хто відповідає за безпеку. Також були наші військові сили безпілотних систем. Визначили, що треба дати Херсону, щоб було більше захисту. Тисячі ударів російських дронів щомісяця проти цього міста. Фактично постійна така загроза. Визначив, що наші сили безпілотних систем, птахи Мадяра і інші підрозділи збільшать тут саме спроможності захисту. Важливо все це реалізувати. Визначили завдання для захисту доріг, логістики. Урядовці допоможуть. У п'ятницю я проведу спеціальну ставку щодо прифронтових міст. І сьогодні є також рішення по енергетиці, по обладнанню для Херсона, фінансування додаткове. Максимум завтра ці рішення мають бути ухвалені урядом на рівні відповідних міністрів. Обласна влада дала запити на потреби громад Херсонщини. Це повинно бути забезпечено щодо садочків, підтримки освіти, всіх соціальних потреб. Люди тут заслуговують на більшу підтримку. Я вдячний усім, хто береже наш Херсон, працює тут для дітей, для того, щоб місто та громади функціонували, щоб було забезпечення життя. Найменше, що може зробити держава, це шана, вдячність. І визначив сьогодні в Херсоні саме таких наших людей. Я їх всіх відзначив і нагородами, і волонтерів, зокрема Андрія Петухова, вчителя, Ларису Паладій, лікарів, рятувальників, поліцейських, інших наших захисників міста. Зірку Героя України я передав синові, справді, героя-фермера, якого дуже добре знали в Херсоні та в усій нашій державі. Олександра Гордієнка. Він дуже багато зробив, щоб Херсонщина жила, щоб розмінувати наші українські землі, захистити від дронів. Ми пам'ятаємо його, ми шануємо усіх наших людей, які дбають про нашу державу, про свою громаду, про ближніх, іноді навіть більше, ніж дбають саме за себе. Дякую всім, хто з Україною, дякую всім на нашій Херсонщині. Слава Україні! Бажаю здоров'я. Сьогодні в Херсоні вже третя річниця звільнення міста від росіян. Окупанти втекли звідси. Ми
Okay, so we saw Zelensky again putting forward the idea that he is implementing increased defensive measures for the city of Kherson. Particularly, he's going to be employing the unmanned systems forces, Birds of Magyar specifically, and some other units. We'll talk about another one in just a second, to attempt to protect the city a bit better. I think this is going to manifest in... I mean, it could manifest into some interception operations of some kind, maybe, but I don't think so. I think this will manifest mostly in terms of going after Russian drone pilots. I think that is our more likely scenario, is that we'll see this develop into a Russian drone pilot hunting campaign by the unmanned systems forces. Okay. So, here we see the 310th EW Battalion. Speaking of one of these other units of the Ukrainian Marine Corps, they are tasked with conducting counter-unmanned aerial systems operations to protect Kherson. You can see in this video that we'll watch here in a second a variety of EW systems. It's a cat and mouse game, as I've described over and over again. You're chasing the frequency, right? So like EW only gives you 2 weeks of time before your opponent figures out what you're doing in terms of what frequencies you're using, and then how to therefore interdict your connection to your VTX. So when you're or to just switch over to a different frequency so that your jamming operation no longer affects their drone. So this is the thing, is you need to keep cycling through, keep this cat and mouse game, chasing your opponent, outsmarting your opponent, and it's this leapfrog game of EW and technological capability. So when you're playing this constant cat and mouse game, it can be quite difficult to achieve the results that we have been seeing. But we have been seeing, high 80s, low to mid 90 operational percentages of operational success in terms of counter unmanned systems operations. Could be a good sign for the future. This week was 85%, down from 96, which is a significant drop. Even though 85% is really good, that's a whole 11% of drones that are getting through and striking. That's a massive gap between uh, interception rates. So even though 85% is good, 11% getting through is still really not where you want to be. But let's take a look again from Zelensky. So he said, I held a coordination meeting on the security and socioeconomic issues of Kherson and the region with military command, attended by the commanders of the 310th Separate Electronic Warfare Battalion and the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces. The focus was on the most critical issues: the number of Russian drones used in attacks, countering them through the Unified Joint Electronic Warfare Center, and mobile fire groups, developing and scaling up the number of EW systems, and protecting roads and logistics with special nets. We discussed energy matters, ensuring Kherson has everything it needs and the corresponding funding, as well as support and additional resources for public utilities, schools, and kindergartens. It's important to implement everything discussed to provide greater protection for the region. People here deserve stronger support. So we can see again this idea that was referred to by or alluded to by Alexander Prokudin some months ago, the military administration governor. He talked in an article, in an interview with Zarina Zabriskie. Zarina Zabriskie said that, there's, or got a comment from him that there's sort of this like Star Wars sort of sci-fi command center that they have in the region that serves as this unified electronic warfare command where they can sort of in real time monitor and conduct counter unmanned systems operations around the city and sort of put up a bubble around the city to some extent. Okay, so that is all that I had on Instagram. I just wanted to show this last piece from Magyar's Birds. In addition to Zelensky being there, we saw also Kherson, the Kherson Dome plan being rolled out by Magyar, who was also there, revisiting the city that he was there 3 years ago. So we'll listen to his spiel here. He says, Robert Magyar Brovdy shared his feelings on the day Kherson was liberated from Russian occupation. Standing on the same square as 3 years ago, the commander of the USF recalls how people celebrated freedom here and welcomed the Ukrainian liberators. The Russians were pushed beyond the Dnieper River, and the city has remained a frontline one ever since. It suffers daily from drones and artillery, while the occupiers hunt civilians from the opposite bank. This vile phenomenon has a name: human safari. Recently, the president of Ukraine reviewed the commander's plan for Kherson Dome, an anti-drone system designed to protect the city from enemy drone swarms. Kherson is and will remain a Ukrainian city. Believe in the strength of Ukraine's defense forces. Glory to Ukraine. All right, let's listen to Magyar.
Рівно 3 роки минуло з того дня, коли 11 листопада 22-го року на цій площі, на котрій я зараз знаходжуся, містилося рівно стільки людей, скільки могла прийняти ця площа, зі сльозами на очах, але з радістю зустрічали Збройні Сили України. Я чітко пам'ятаю той день, тоді ще силами територіальної оборони ми з хлопцями 206-го батальйону заходили на цю площу, в числі перших, і бачили ту радість, котрою нас зустрічали херсончани. 3 роки тут продовжує жити десятки тисяч мирного населення, в тому числі велика кількість дітей. І це місто щоденно претерпає від кабів, від артилерії ворожої і від сотень, навіть тисяч запущених щомісячно по місту Херсон дронів. Тож, вітаючи вас з цим знаменним днем, 3-ю річницею звільнення Херсона, я хочу побажати вам великого терпіння та сил, дорогі наші херсончани. Херсон був, є і залишатиметься українським, незалежно від намірів окупанта. Але мусите бути пильні, тому що ворог зовсім поряд. Ми, в свою чергу, докладатимемо всіх зусиль для того, щоб захищати це місто від безпілотної компоненти і не дати сюди проникнути. Перебило дзвінком, не дати сюди проникнути ворогу повторно. Тому вітаю вас ще раз. Сил вам, терпіння, вірте в Збройні Сили України, вірте в Україну.
Тьомаю, добрий день.
All right. And with that, that's all I got for you guys today. Remember, Kherson will never be a Russian city, and I will see you guys next week.